I just went and saw The Shape of Water and I loved it, so I'm going to talk to you about it. This film was beautiful. If you are unaware of this film, first off, it has a great score on Rotten Tomatoes. It's highly recommended. It's a limited release film, I guess, because it doesn't show in like a lot of theaters, but it does show pretty widely, certainly in this area. It is a Guillermo del Toro film about sort of like a fairy tale. I read a lot of interviews before this film came out, so I sort of knew what I was getting myself into, and I think that heightened my enjoyment, but the film is fantastic. So it's called The Shape of Water, and it is basically a love story between a young mute woman and a sort of creature from the Black Lagoon-esque amphibian man that's being held in a research facility. So she is a maid or janitor at the research facility, and she cleans up everything there, and she happens to run into this amphibian man character where he's being held for study and starts to form a connection with him. So she's mute, so she signs, and he doesn't speak English because he's an amphibian man creature from the Black Lagoon-esque monster, I guess. And so she signs at him, and he sort of learns those signs, and they have a connection, they build a relationship, and then when it's discovered that they're going to be putting him down because they don't have use for him anymore, she whisks him away to try and rescue him. And that's the basis of the story, and then, it gets crazier from there. It also opens up with this opening monologue of this guy being like, if I was going to tell you the story of the princess, what would I tell you? And you can tell that he is the person who's going to be the overarching story. Getting into the film itself, one of my favorite parts is the sort of, I guess I'll just call it like the Del Toro-ness of it all. One of the things about Guillermo del Toro is that he's very, very specific about everything he selects. So the colors that he picks, the way he designs things, the way he does shots, it's all for a very specific reason. And if you just sit back and watch it, you can sort of see it all come together. And it doesn't necessarily affect the way that you view things, but it is important to know the kind of thought that he puts into it. And he has a very interesting visual style. So if you've seen the Hellboy films, or if you've seen Pan's Labyrinth, which is another one of my favorite movies, you sort of get a feel for the way that he shapes a world and he creates scenes. And I love that about him, and I loved that about this movie. So it's called The Shape of Water. It's very clearly got those blue overtones everywhere, and it opens with this gorgeous scene, which is you going underneath the water and into this house, and you sort of see everything sort of floating around and fish swimming, and then things start to sink as if the water was draining out, and everything slowly sinks. And then you realize as it resets itself that you're in the main character, Eliza's apartment. And so that is how the scene kicks off. And it's just beautiful. There are blue undertones in everything to give it that water feel, these blues and greens. And just the sound mixing too has this very like floating, ethereal feel. And I adored everything visually about this film. I also thought that the creature was fantastic. The costume was great. He's got this sort of power. They worshipped him as a god in the Amazon where he was from. He's got this sort of power, and his skin lights up. And just the way that was done, even though it's probably in LEDs, and this suit just looked so organic, and I loved it. It looked like electric eels or any of those light up creatures under the sea. It was just beautiful. From start to finish, this film was beautiful. It also featured a lot of very broken characters. That was sort of the point of this, was that all of these different characters that were broken in their own ways were going to come together and sort of hopefully make each other whole. So you have Eliza, who is the main character, and she's mute, and she sometimes feels a little bit broken because of that. And she mentions that part of the reason that she likes the creature is that he doesn't care and doesn't know that she's broken. And then you have her friend Zelda, who she works with, and Zelda's in what is very clearly an unhappy marriage, and she seems a little bit broken there. and her desire to stand up to her husband and be like, no, you know what, I'm gonna help them, is a change and a turning point for her when she comes into her own. And then Eliza has a neighbor. His name is Giles. He is an artist, and he's also very clearly gay. This is set in a sort of indeterminate time, but it looks to be like the 1940s, I would say. And so he's clearly gay in a time when that was not acceptable, and you can see that brokenness in him. Plus, he wants to be an artist and wants to do this commercial art, and clearly was let go from his job because of his identity, his sexual identity. And so you see him struggling with that, and he sort of learns to accept who he is and become a stronger person with his interactions with the creature. And then you also have, I wrote this name down because I know I'd forget it, Dr. Huffstetter, who is the doctor who's looking over the creature, clearly develops a sort of sympathy for him. He also happens to be a Soviet spy, but he eventually, through the course of the film, turns against the Soviets he was working for in favor of helping Liza save the creature, which I thought was beautiful, like that he was willing to do that. And then you also have Strickland, who is like the military man whose job it is to guard this creature so that they can study it and use what you learn about it to help people get into space. And he is a different sort of broken. So he very clearly is so focused on everything being right that he can't see beyond the nose on his own face. And very, very early in the film, he gets his fingers, other hand, I guess, he gets these two fingers bitten off by the creature. And Eliza finds them, and then they sew them back on. And then as he slowly starts to lose it, after Eliza takes the creature and he's searching for it, and you can see him starting to lose it as his life falls apart, this vendetta starts to drive him, and he's clearly not focusing on the things he can focus on. His fingers, which have been sewn back on, start to desiccate. And so they turn from pink and healthy and moving to sort of they're bleeding, and then they sort of start to change purple and blue, and then eventually they turn black, and everybody's commenting on how they smell. And I liked that journey of like physical brokenness to combine with the brokenness and sort of the darkness in his spirit. I thought that was beautifully done. And then you get to the core of the film, which is sympathy and understanding. And eventually the people who sympathize and understand the creature, they can come to learn things from him and benefit from his powers. He is able to give Giles his hair back. Giles was going bald. And he just has a lot of powers, and he's this pure, sympathetic creature. And once Eliza takes him out, they start to form this connection, and it's really a love story, which is interesting. And I read a lot of interviews with Guillermo del Toro, and one of the ones he talked about is that when he was a young boy, he watched The Creature from the Black Lagoon, and he thought that it was going to end with the girl and the creature being together, and he was kind of disappointed that it didn't end that way. And so he clearly made this film sort of in response to that feeling he had, that it's possible to look beyond everything and for the girl and the creature to end up together. And that's what happens in this film. It has sort of a sad ending. There's a big shootout, and the creature is able to heal itself from the bullet wounds, but you're not sure about Eliza. And so it has an ambiguous ending, but it ends very beautifully, and I just loved the way that that whole thing was wrapped up. Sorry for the spoilers. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is, as I was walking out of the theater, there's this girl and her boyfriend who'd been sitting near me, and she goes, I can't believe that had such a high rating on Rotten Tomatoes. I'm never trusting Rotten Tomatoes again. And I really wanted to turn around to her and be like, that film was a masterpiece. Clearly you do not understand art. And then I realized I'd become one of those people. So I would rate this 4.5 out of 5. It doesn't get a 5-star rating from me just because, as somebody who writes a lot of dark stuff, it's really weird that dark stuff isn't my favorite when I watch films, but I'm a sucker for a happy ending. but it does get 4.5 because it's gorgeous, and I would highly recommend this film, especially if you like anything else that Guillermo del Toro has done. This fits very nicely into sort of his sandbox, and it's just a masterfully designed film. From start to finish, it's clear that there is a lot of thought put in it, and the visuals are very, very stunning. So yeah, I say go out and see it, The Shape of Water, and I will see you tomorrow.